I froze in the doorway of our empty apartment, my luggage still in hand. The silence felt wrong. Sarah wasn't expecting me for another 2 days. My presentation in Chicago had wrapped up early when our potential clients made their decision faster than anticipated. I'd caught an earlier flight, planning to surprise her. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice echoing through our spacious loft. "Nothing." I wheeled my suitcase to the bedroom, loosening my tie. A quick glance at my watch confirmed it was only 6:30. She'd mentioned something about working late again tonight, the third time this week. As I hung up her camel coat that was draped across our bed, something fluttered to the floor from the pocket. A restaurant receipt. I picked it up, about to toss it onto her nightstand when the date caught my eye. Last Tuesday. The night she texted me about being stuck at the office until 11, too swamped with the Hendricks account to even call. I turned the paper over in my hand, noticing a phone number scrawled on the back in what was definitely not Sarah's handwriting. My stomach tightened. 10 years in corporate consulting had taught me to notice patterns. And Sarah's behavior these past few months had been nothing if not a pattern. Coming home well after dinner, the sudden influx of work emergencies, the way she guarded her phone like it contained state secrets. The constant working dinners that left no digital trace in our shared calendar. I sat on the edge of our bed, receipt still in hand, when I heard her key in the lock. "Hello." Her voice floated through the apartment, musical and light. Then, "Tom? Is that you?" I tucked the receipt into my pocket and moved to the living room. There she was, my wife of 6 years, looking startled in the entryway. She wore a fitted black dress I hadn't seen before, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. "Surprise?" I said, forcing a smile. The Chicago meeting wrapped early. Sarah's hand flew to her chest. "You scared me half to death." She laughed, but it sounded hollow. Her eyes darted to her phone before she slipped it into her purse. "I wasn't expecting you until Thursday." Clearly. I moved toward her, giving her a kiss on the cheek. She smelled like unfamiliar perfume and mint gum, as if she'd been trying to mask another scent. "How was work?" "Exhausting." She set her purse down, avoiding my eyes. "The team had a dinner meeting with the new client. The one I told you about last week?" I nodded, pretending I knew which client she meant. "And how did that go?" "Great, actually. I think we closed the deal." She kicked off her heels and headed to the kitchen. "I need a glass of wine." "Want one?" I followed her, watching as she poured herself a generous glass of our expensive Cabernet, the bottle we'd been saving for our anniversary next month. Her hands trembled slightly. "So who were you having dinner with exactly?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She took a long sip before answering. "Just the team and the client's representatives. No one interesting." Another sip. "How was your trip?" "I wasn't expecting you to be here when I got home." "Apparently." The word came out sharper than I intended. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "What does that mean?" I backtracked. "Nothing. I'm just tired from the flight. I needed time to think, to figure out what was really going on." "Want to watch something?" 20 minutes later, we were on the couch with some forgettable movie playing. Sarah checked her phone every few minutes, angling it away from me each time. The space between us on the couch felt like miles. "By the way," she said during a lull in the film, her voice deliberately casual, "Ashley and I are going away this weekend. Just a girls' trip to recharge. We've been planning it for ages." "Ashley?" Her college friend who always looked at me with poorly disguised pity. I nodded, feeling something cold settle in my chest. "Sounds fun," I managed. Sarah's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, then quickly turned it face down. "Just work," she murmured. I nodded again, the receipt burning a hole in my pocket. Outside our floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered like nothing was wrong, like my life wasn't unraveling thread by thread. The movie played on, neither of us watching. I was already planning my next move. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay beside Sarah, listening to her steady breathing, wondering how many nights she had lain awake beside me, planning her escape. The receipt felt like a burning coal under my pillow where I'd hidden it. When morning light finally filtered through our blinds, I waited until Sarah was in the shower before grabbing my phone. A quick search of Ashley's Instagram confirmed what some part of me already knew: she was in Thailand. Had been for a week, according to her abundant posts of temple visits and beach sunsets. My fingers trembled as I dialed Mark's number. He picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Tom? It's 7 in the morning on a Saturday, man. I need your help," I said, moving to the kitchen where the running water would mask my voice. "Remember how you said you owed me one after I helped with your divorce paperwork?" Pause. "Yeah." I'm calling in that favor. 20 minutes later, I was in a corner booth at a diner 3 blocks from our apartment. Mark arrived looking like he just rolled out of bed, his dark hair disheveled, eyes hidden behind sunglasses despite the dim interior. "This better be important," he muttered, sliding into the booth across from me. I placed the receipt on the table between us. "I need you to trace this number." Mark pushed his sunglasses up, his expression changing as he studied my face. "Sarah?" I nodded, throat too tight for words. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Tom, are you sure you want to go down this road? Sometimes it's better not to know. She's planning a weekend getaway with someone named Ashley, who's currently posting coconut cocktail photos from Phuket." I pushed the receipt closer to him. "I need to know." Mark studied me for a long moment, then took the receipt. "I don't do this stuff anymore, you know that, right? I left intelligence work for a reason. You're the only person I can trust with this." He ordered coffee black and pulled out his laptop. "The truth can be a real bastard, Tom. You sure you're ready for it?" I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. We spent the morning in that booth, nursing bottomless cups of coffee while Mark worked his digital magic. He made a few calls, speaking in low tones and technical jargon I couldn't follow. By noon he had a name. Daniel Craig. Mark slid a printout across the table. Not the actor, but a financial consultant with an office in Midtown. 42 years old. Married with 2 kids. "How long?" I asked, staring at the man's LinkedIn profile photo. He had the kind of easy confidence that came with old money, perfect teeth, expensive haircut, a smile that said he always got what he wanted. Mark hesitated. 6 months based on the call records. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "There's more." He turned his laptop to face me. On the screen was a series of text messages between Sarah and this Daniel. Intimate messages. Plans. Jokes at my expense. My vision tunneled as I read their exchanges. Just a few more weeks until the business sale closes. Tom suspects nothing. Can't wait to start our real life together. These hidden meetings aren't enough anymore. Tom thinks I'm working late again tonight. Meet me at our usual place at 8? And worst of all, sometimes I can hardly remember why I married him in the first place. What a mistake. I pushed the laptop away, feeling sick. "How did you get these?" Mark closed the screen. "You don't want to know. And if anyone asks, I had nothing to do with this." I nodded numbly, trying to process what I'd just read. 6 years of marriage reduced to a mistake. Our life together, a placeholder until something better came along. "There's one more thing," Mark said quietly. "I checked your joint accounts." My head snapped up. "And?" "Small withdrawals once or twice a week. 500 here, 1,000 there. Started about 4 months ago." The room seemed to tilt. "How much total?" "Just over 70,000. I thought I'd felt betrayal when I found the receipt. That was nothing compared to this hollow, burning sensation spreading through my chest now." "What are you going to do?" Mark asked, signaling for the check. I stared out the window, watching pedestrians go about their Saturday routines, buying coffee, walking dogs, living normal lives while mine imploded. "I'm going to find out where she's really going this weekend," I said finally. "And then I'm going to make sure I'm there waiting for them." Mark's face darkened. "Tom, don't do anything stupid." I managed a smile that felt more like a grimace. "I'm not going to confront them, not yet. I need evidence for the divorce. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." "And after that?" I thought about the business we'd built together, the money she'd been siphoning away, the future we'd planned that had apparently been a charade. "After that," I said, "I'm going to make sure she regrets ever thinking she could play me for a fool." I spent that night hunched over my laptop at our kitchen table, bathed in the blue glow of the screen. Sarah had gone to bed hours ago, claiming exhaustion from her workweek. Now, with each financial document I opened, the betrayal cut deeper. Our joint savings account, where we'd been putting money aside for a vacation home in Vermont, had been quietly bleeding funds for months. Small withdrawals, strategically timed to avoid suspicion. 1,000 here, 1,500 there. All transferred to an account I'd never seen before. I pulled up our investment portfolio. Several stocks had been liquidated. On paper, everything looked intact. Sarah had replaced the sold shares with new investments that hadn't matured yet. Clever. Anyone glancing at the balance wouldn't notice the difference. But I wasn't just anyone. A text from Mark lit up my phone. Found the hotel reservation. Grand Plaza. Presidential suite booked under D. Craig for this weekend. Sending details. The Grand Plaza. One of the most expensive hotels in the city. I'd taken Sarah there for our 3rd anniversary, spent a fortune on champagne and room service. We'd watched the sunrise from the balcony, making plans for our future. Now she was taking another man there, using our money. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I considered my options. The impulsive part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to wake her up and demand answers. But the strategic part, the part that had built our business from nothing, knew better. I opened a new browser window and booked my own room at the Grand Plaza. Not the presidential suite, but a standard room 4 floors below. Close enough to act, far enough to avoid detection. Next, I called Alan Berkowitz, my attorney. It went to voicemail as expected at 2 a.m. Alan, it's Tom Harrington. I need to speak with you urgently about protecting my business assets in a potential divorce situation. Call me first thing. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too calm, too controlled for a man whose life was collapsing. I opened another document, our business partnership agreement. Sarah and I had started the consulting firm together, though I'd put up most of the initial capital. She handled client relations while I managed operations and strategy. On paper, we were equal partners. But the fine print, which I'd insisted on despite her protests about not needing formalities between spouses, gave me controlling interest if certain conditions were met. Infidelity wasn't explicitly mentioned, but financial malfeasance was. I forwarded the incriminating financial records to Alan, then drafted an email to Jason Pierce, the private investigator who'd handled security checks for our highest-profile clients. I explained the situation in clinical terms, as if discussing someone else's marriage. Requested photographic evidence. Outlined what I needed for court. By 4 a.m, I had the skeleton of a plan. I created a new folder on an encrypted drive, labeling it Phoenix Project. Our code for business contingency plans that required complete rebuilding from the ashes. The sound of movement from our bedroom jolted me back to the present. I quickly closed the laptop as Sarah padded into the kitchen, her silk robe clinging to her frame. "Can't sleep?" she asked, her voice husky with sleep. In the dim light, she looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman I thought I knew. "Just catching up on some work," I lied, watching her fill a glass with water. "Thought I'd get ahead before Monday." She came up behind me, her hands resting on my shoulders. Her touch, once comforting, now made my skin crawl. "Always working so hard," she murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. "That's what I love about you." I forced myself to lean into her touch, to play the role of unsuspecting husband. "Just trying to secure our future." "Speaking of which," she said, moving to sit across from me, "I was thinking we should have a special dinner tomorrow night before my trip with Ashley. I'll cook your favorite, that steak with the peppercorn sauce." I smiled, amazed at how easily the expression came despite the hollowness inside. "Sounds perfect." She beamed, squeezing my hand before standing. "Don't stay up too much longer. You need rest too." After she returned to bed, I reopened the laptop. Added one more item to my plan. Dinner tomorrow. Act normal. Let her believe her performance is convincing. I glanced toward our bedroom, where the woman who had planned to dismantle our life together now slept peacefully. In 48 hours, she would be at the Grand Plaza with her lover, thinking herself safely hidden. She had no idea I would be waiting. Saturday morning arrived with painful normalcy. Sarah hummed in the kitchen, preparing breakfast as if it were any other weekend. I watched her from the doorway, the easy smile, the graceful movements, all part of a performance I'd been too blind to see through. "I packed you some of those protein bars you like," she said, zipping up her weekend bag. "For when you're working late and forget to eat." The irony wasn't lost on me. She was packing provisions for a husband who wouldn't need them while she enjoyed room service with her lover. "Thanks," I said, accepting her goodbye kiss, my arms wooden around her. "Have fun with Ashley." Her eyes flickered, just a millisecond of hesitation before she doubled down on the lie. "I will. Don't work too hard while I'm gone, okay?" I nodded, watching as she wheeled her suitcase to the door. "Text me when you get there safely." She promised she would, then she was gone. I counted to 100 before pulling out my phone. Jason Pierce answered on the first ring. "Mr. Harrington. My associate is in position." "And?" "Your wife arrived at the Grand Plaza 7 minutes ago. She was met in the lobby by a man matching the description of Daniel Craig. They embraced. Intimately. Photos have been sent to your encrypted email." My throat tightened. Even expecting it, confirmation hit like a physical blow. "I'll be there in an hour," I said. I opened my laptop to find the images Jason had sent. Sarah and Daniel in the hotel lobby, his hands on her waist, her arms around his neck. The timestamp showed 10:23 a.m., barely 30 minutes after she'd left our apartment with promises and lies. My phone pinged with a text from Sarah. Arrived at Ashley's lake house. Signal spotty but will call later. Love you. I didn't bother responding. At the Grand Plaza, I approached the concierge desk with practiced confidence, slipping the young man my business card along with $100 bill. Thomas Harrington. I believe my associate, Victor Manning, made arrangements regarding my stay. Recognition flickered in the concierge's eyes. Victor, the hotel's general manager, was a former client who still owed me for negotiating his contract. Of course, Mr. Harrington. Mr. Manning mentioned you might be joining us today. Your room is ready and he's provided you with additional access. He handed me a keycard with a discreet nod. 12th floor. And the presidential suite? 14th floor, East Wing. I thanked him and headed for the elevator, my overnight bag feeling impossibly heavy. In it was everything I needed, a change of clothes, toiletries, and a large manila envelope containing every piece of evidence I'd gathered. Jason was waiting in a service alcove on the 12th floor, a compact man with watchful eyes who blended perfectly into the background of any setting. They're in the suite now, he said without preamble, handing me a small device. This connects to the surveillance camera I placed in the hallway outside their room. They've ordered champagne and lunch. His expression remained professionally neutral. My associate is monitoring the lobby in case they leave. I nodded, taking the device. What else do you have for me? He passed me a thick folder. Everything you asked for. Financial records, text messages, photos. And something extra, Daniel Craig's personal background. I flipped through the pages, stopping at a family photograph. Daniel with his wife, an elegant brunette, and 2 young children maybe 7 and 9 years old. His wife's name is Rebecca, Jason said quietly. She's a pediatric surgeon at Mercy Hospital. The children are Emma and James. They live in Westchester County. He commutes. The pages blurred as I processed this information. Daniel wasn't just betraying a spouse, he was betraying an entire family. Does Sarah know about them? Jason nodded. Based on the text messages, yes. He's told her he's planning to leave them after some real estate deal closes next month. The same lie he'd probably told others before Sarah. The same lie Sarah was telling herself to justify what they were doing. One more thing, Jason added, handing me a business card. Rebecca Craig's direct number at the hospital. I thought you might want it. I stared at the card, a plan forming in my mind. Can you get a duplicate envelope of all this evidence? Already done. He gestured to his briefcase. Standard procedure. I checked my watch. It was just past noon. I need you to deliver the duplicate to Rebecca Craig. Not at her home, her workplace. Today. Jason's expression didn't change, but something like respect flickered in his eyes. Consider it done. And after that, I pulled out my phone and ordered the most expensive bottle of champagne the hotel offered, to be sent to the presidential suite. Add a note, I told the room service operator. Enjoy your weekend, Tom. Jason raised an eyebrow as I ended the call. Now, I said, we wait. I watched them on the small monitor Jason had provided. The presidential suite's corridor was empty except for a room service waiter approaching with the champagne I'd ordered. I held my breath as he knocked. Daniel answered, looking relaxed in an unbuttoned shirt and hotel slippers. He signed for the champagne, frowning slightly as he read the note. The camera caught his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. He disappeared inside with the bottle. Through the slight gap before the door closed, I glimpsed Sarah lounging on a sofa in a silk robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. How long before they find the envelope? I asked Jason, who stood at the window of my room, binoculars trained on the building across the street where his associate maintained a second surveillance position. The concierge confirmed it was slipped under their door 15 minutes ago. They probably haven't noticed it yet. I nodded, my heart pounding against my ribs. 6 years of marriage and it had come to this, spying on my wife in a hotel room with another man. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, having wine with Ashley by the lake. Signal better than expected. How's your day going? I didn't bother responding. Instead, I straightened my tie and checked my appearance in the mirror. I looked composed, but my eyes held something I'd never seen before, a cold determination that made me almost unrecognizable to myself. They've found it, Jason said suddenly. On the monitor, I could see Daniel in the hallway, frantically looking in both directions, the large envelope clutched in his hand. He retreated back into the room. Now? I asked. Jason nodded. Now. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt interminable. Each floor brought me closer to a confrontation I'd never imagined having. In my pocket was my own copy of the evidence, the final nail in the coffin of my marriage. I knocked 3 times on the door of the presidential suite. Silence. Then whispered voices, hurried movements. I knocked again louder. The door opened a crack and there was Sarah, her face pale, eyes wide with shock. For a moment she seemed unable to speak. "Tom," she finally managed, her voice barely audible. "What? How did you? May I come in?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She glanced behind her, then back at me, panic evident in her expression. "This isn't I can explain." "I'm sure you can." I pushed the door gently and she stepped back, allowing me to enter. The suite was extravagant, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, plush furniture, a half-empty bottle of wine on the coffee table. 2 glasses. The champagne I'd sent stood unopened. Daniel was nowhere to be seen. "Where is he?" I asked, my tone conversational, as if inquiring about a mutual friend. Sarah's hand trembled as she tucked her hair behind her ear. "I don't know what you're talking about." I walked to the bathroom door and knocked. "Mr. Craig? I think it's time we met properly, don't you?" No response. "He's not," Sarah began. "Your lover is hiding in the bathroom while I confront my wife about her infidelity," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "At least have the dignity to face this like adults." The bathroom door opened slowly. Daniel Craig emerged, fully dressed now, his expression a mixture of defiance and fear. "Tom Harrington," I said, extending my hand. "Though I'm sure Sarah has told you all about me." He hesitated, then shook my hand briefly. "This isn't what it looks like." I laughed, a hollow sound that surprised even me. "Really?" "Because it looks exactly like my wife and her lover spending the weekend in a hotel suite paid for with money from our joint account. It looks like 6 months of lies and deception. It looks like a plan to leave me after draining our business dry." I pulled out my copy of the evidence. "Did I miss anything?" Sarah sank onto the sofa, her face in her hands. "How did you find out? Does it matter? You left a trail a mile wide. The real question is how you thought you'd get away with it." Daniel moved to stand beside Sarah, placing a hand on her shoulder. The gesture of intimacy sent a surge of anger through me. "We didn't mean for it to happen like this," he said, as if that explained everything. "Like what?" "Behind my back." "Behind your wife's back?" "Behind your children's backs." His head snapped up. "Leave my family out of this." "The way you left them out of your affair? The way you left them out of your plans to abandon them?" I stepped closer. "Rebecca knows, by the way. I made sure of it. She's probably looking at the exact same evidence right now." The color drained from his face. "You had no right." "Your phone's been buzzing in your jacket for the last 5 minutes, I pointed out. "I'd check it if I were you." As if on cue, his phone rang loudly from where his jacket hung over a chair. The display lit up with his wife's name. "You should answer that," I said quietly. "It sounds important." Daniel stared at his ringing phone as if it were a live grenade. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. Rebecca's name flashed persistently on the screen. "You should answer it," I repeated. "Before she calls your children next." His face contorted with panic. "This is going to destroy my family." "You did that yourself," I said, surprised by my own calmness. "The moment you decided your vows meant nothing." He grabbed his phone and retreated to the far corner of the suite, his voice low and urgent. "Becca, I can explain." Sarah remained frozen on the sofa, her eyes fixed on me. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." I sat in the armchair across from her, maintaining the distance between us. "The receipt from Antonio's fell out of your coat pocket Tuesday night when you said you were working late." Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by calculation. I could almost see her mind racing to find an explanation, an excuse, something to salvage the situation. "Tom," she began, leaning forward, her voice taking on the persuasive tone she used with difficult clients. "This isn't what it looks like. Daniel and I." "Save it," I cut her off. "I've read your text messages. I know about the money you've been siphoning from our accounts. I know about your plans after the business sale. I know everything." From the corner, Daniel's voice rose sharply. "Becca, please, just let me come home and explain in person." Sarah's attention snapped to him, her expression darkening as his conversation continued. "No, it's not like that," Daniel was saying, desperation evident in his voice. It was a mistake. Just a mistake." I watched as Sarah's face registered the blow of his words. Daniel paced, running his hand through his hair. Of course I'm coming home. You and the kids are my life. Sarah stood abruptly. What are you saying, Daniel? He held up his hand to silence her, turning away. Becca, I swear it didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything? Sarah repeated, her voice rising. 6 months of I love you, and we'll be together soon didn't mean anything? Daniel covered the phone. Not now, Sarah, he hissed. I watched the scene unfold with detached fascination. The carefully constructed fantasy they'd built was collapsing spectacularly, and I hadn't even needed to do much. They were destroying each other quite efficiently on their own. Daniel ended his call and turned to face us both, his expression hardened with newfound resolve. I need to go home to my family. Your family? Sarah's laugh was brittle. What about our plans? The house in Malibu? Our future? Be realistic, Sarah. His tone shifted, becoming dismissive. I have children. Did you really think I'd leave them? You said they'd be better off. You said your marriage was over in all but name. He shook his head, not meeting her eyes as he gathered his belongings. I need to fix things with Rebecca. My kids need me. The transformation was remarkable. The man who had been planning to abandon his family minutes ago was now casting himself as the devoted father rushing back to his responsibilities. I almost admired the efficiency with which he pivoted. So that's it. Sarah's voice cracked. After everything we've shared? Daniel paused at the door, finally looking at her with what appeared to be genuine regret. I'm sorry, Sarah. This was a mistake. For both of us. He glanced at me. I truly am sorry. Then he was gone, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Sarah stood motionless, staring at the closed door. Then, with a visible effort, she composed herself and turned to me. Tom, she said quietly, her voice steadier than I expected. Can we talk? Alone. I considered her request. Part of me wanted to walk out, to leave her with the wreckage of her deception. But something in her expression, not manipulation this time but a raw vulnerability, made me stay. I'll give you 5 minutes. She nodded, sinking back onto the sofa. I know you won't believe this, but Daniel wasn't what you think. An affair partner who abandons you the moment his wife finds out? He's exactly what I think. No. She shook her head. He was a means to an end. I needed his financial connections, his client list. I was using him. I stared at her, incredulous. You expect me to believe that? I made him think I was in love with him to get access to his portfolio. Yes, we were intimate. I'm not denying that. But my end goal. She hesitated, then met my eyes directly. It was never about running away with him. It was about securing my own future. Our accounts weren't enough. Our business wasn't enough. She leaned forward. Tom, I made a terrible mistake. But maybe we could talk about this. Privately. Come up with an arrangement that works for both of us. I stared at Sarah, trying to reconcile the woman before me, vulnerable yet still calculating, with the person I thought I'd married. Even now, caught in her web of lies, she was spinning new ones, looking for angles. An arrangement, I repeated slowly. You're suggesting a business transaction. She nodded, something like relief crossing her features. We've always been good partners, Tom. In business at least. We could. Stop. I held up my hand. Just stop. Do you think I came here without a plan? Her expression faltered. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone and showed her an email I'd sent earlier that morning. While you were checking into this hotel with your financial connection, I was meeting with our investors. She paled, reaching for the phone. You didn't? I did. I told them everything. With evidence. I put the phone back in my pocket. Keller, Bromine, Westfield. All the major accounts you cultivated. The ones you thought would follow you after our split. That's our livelihood, she whispered. Your recent actions suggested you were planning a different livelihood altogether. I was simply protecting the company. Sarah stood, pacing the room in agitation. You had no right. I had every right. As majority stakeholder, I have a fiduciary duty to protect the business from threats, including internal ones. I watched her process the information. They were surprisingly understanding. Keller even offered to increase his investment once you're removed from the equation. Removed? She stopped pacing. You can't push me out. We're equal partners. Section 23.4 of our operating agreement states that in cases of financial malfeasance or actions detrimental to the company's interests, majority voting rights revert entirely to the uncompromised partner. I recited the clause from memory. I drafted that section myself, remember? You said it was unnecessary between spouses. She sank back onto the sofa, momentarily speechless. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I answered, maintaining eye contact with Sarah. Mr. Harrington? This is Edward Morgan, Sarah's father. A man who had treated me with thinly veiled disdain since our wedding day. Edward, I acknowledged, watching curiosity bloom on Sarah's face. I'm afraid this isn't a good time. I know what's happening, he said, his voice heavy. Rebecca Craig is my colleague's sister-in-law. Word travels fast. I remained silent, waiting. I want to meet with you, he continued. Without Sarah. There are things you should know. I checked my watch. I'll be at my office in 2 hours. I'll be there. He paused. And Thomas? I owe you an apology. For many things. I ended the call, wondering what new revelations awaited me. My father? Sarah asked, her composure slipping further. Why is he calling you? That's between Edward and me. I stood, buttoning my suit jacket. I've arranged for the hotel room to be paid through tomorrow. You might want to use the time to find alternate living arrangements. You're throwing me out of our home? Indignation colored her voice. The locks were changed an hour ago. Your personal items will be packed and delivered to any address you provide. I moved toward the door. My lawyer will contact you on Monday regarding divorce proceedings. Tom, wait. She rose, desperation replacing calculation in her eyes. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, take time to. There's nothing to fix, Sarah. You didn't make a mistake. You made hundreds of deliberate choices, day after day, to betray not just our marriage but our entire life together. I paused, studying her. The strangest part is, I'm not even angry anymore. I'm just disappointed. In both of us. Me for being blind and you for being exactly who you always were. What does that mean? I'm meeting your father to find out. Fear flickered across her face, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her. My father doesn't know anything about me. We'll see. I opened the door, then turned back. By the way, the money you transferred to your secret account? It's been frozen. Turns out banks take a dim view of unauthorized transfers from business reserves. She blanched. How did you? The same way I identified the shell company you created 3 months ago. The one you were planning to use after the business sale. I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. I might not be as flashy as you in client meetings, Sarah, but I've always been better at seeing the details. I left her standing in the middle of the presidential suite, surrounded by the trappings of luxury she'd purchased with stolen money and broken promises. As the elevator doors closed, I felt a weight lifting, not completely gone but lighter than it had been in months. My phone buzzed with a text from Jason. Meeting arranged with Edward Morgan. Background check complete. Preliminary findings suggest this isn't S's first marriage or identity. Details waiting at your office. I leaned against the elevator wall, processing this new information. 6 years of marriage, and I was only now about to discover who my wife really was. A week had passed since the hotel confrontation. I'd moved into a sleek downtown apartment that felt more like a hotel than a home. All clean lines and empty spaces, devoid of shared memories. It suited my current state of mind. The meeting with Edward Morgan had been illuminating, to say the least. Sarah's father, a distinguished cardiologist with steel gray hair and the same piercing blue eyes as his daughter, had arrived at my office carrying a thick folder and an expression of weary resignation. She was born Claire Elizabeth Morgan, he told me, sliding old photographs across my desk. A younger Sarah, Claire, with darker hair and the same calculated smile. Sarah is her middle name. She started using it after the first incident. The incident, as Edward clinically described it, was Sarah's first marriage at 23 to a tech entrepreneur in Boston. A marriage that ended when she was caught embezzling company funds with her lover, the CFO. No charges were filed, her husband had been too embarrassed, but she'd been paid to disappear with a legally binding agreement never to use his name or contact him again. We thought she'd learned her lesson, Edward had said, rubbing his temples. Patricia, my wife, and I paid for therapy, helped her establish a new life in New York. When she met you, seemed to settle down, we hoped. Now, staring out the window of my temporary home at the city lights below, I tried to reconcile this new information with the woman I thought I knew. 6 years of marriage built on a foundation of secrets and lies. Had any of it been real? My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, an old friend who'd gradually disappeared from my life after Sarah had declared her toxic and jealous. Another manipulation I'd been blind to. How are you holding up? Free for coffee tomorrow? I typed back a quick affirmative, realizing it had been nearly 2 years since we'd had a proper conversation. How many other friendships had withered under Sarah's subtle influence? The psychotherapist I'd started seeing, Dr. Mercer, had a term for it: isolation tactics. It's common in emotionally abusive relationships, she'd explained during our second session. The abuser slowly separates their victim from support systems, making them increasingly dependent on the abuser's validation and reality. I hadn't been ready to accept that label, emotionally abused, but the evidence was becoming harder to ignore. The way Sarah would subtly criticize my decisions. How she'd rewrite our arguments to make me doubt my memory. The constant moving of goalposts for what would make her happy. A notification from my lawyer interrupted my thoughts. S's attorney requesting mediation before proceeding with divorce. Recommendation: proceed directly to court with evidence of financial malfeasance. Call me. Sarah was still trying to manipulate the situation, hoping for a private setting where she could work her charm without the scrutiny of legal proceedings. Not this time. I poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey and sat at the minimalist dining table, opening my laptop to review the latest business reports. Our company's stock had actually risen since the news of our split, and Sarah's departure had been carefully communicated to key stakeholders. Turned out her irreplaceable client relationships weren't so irreplaceable after all. My phone rang, an unknown number. Hello? Tom. It's me. Sarah's voice. Please don't hang up. I remained silent, waiting. I've been getting help, she continued, her voice missing its usual polished edge. I started therapy. Real therapy this time, not just the performance I gave before. What do you want, Sarah? She hesitated. I know you've talked to my father. I know what he told you. About Claire? Or about husband number 1? A sharp intake of breath. Both, I suppose. But there's more to the story than his version. There always is with you. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she said quickly. Or reconciliation. I need you to know that not everything was a lie. Some of it was real. What I felt for you. Stop. I cut her off, a familiar weariness settling over me. Whatever you felt wasn't enough to keep you from betraying me in every possible way. That's the only reality that matters now. Tom? Goodbye, Sarah. Or Claire. Or whoever you decide to be next. Talk to my lawyer if you need anything. I hung up and blocked the number, something I should have done days ago. Outside, rain began to fall, blurring the city lights into watercolor smudges. I thought about the red flags I'd ignored throughout our relationship. Her convenient stories that never quite added up, friends who mysteriously became enemies, the way she could charm anyone when needed but dropped the facade in private. Dr. Mercer had asked in our last session what I would have done differently if I'd recognized these warning signs. I hadn't had an answer then. But sitting alone in this empty apartment, I realized the question wasn't what I would have done differently with Sarah. It was what I would do differently now with the rest of my life. Tomorrow I'd meet Lisa for coffee. I'd call my brother in Seattle, who'd stopped visiting after Sarah had made him feel unwelcome. I'd reconnect with the people I'd allowed to fade from my life. The rain intensified, washing the windows clean. Appropriate, I thought. It was time to clear the view and see things as they really were. 3 months after the hotel confrontation, I found myself sitting in a wood-paneled courtroom, watching as Sarah, immaculately dressed in a conservative navy suit, whispered to her attorney. The divorce proceedings had finally begun after weeks of postponements and legal maneuvering on her part. My lawyer, Alan, leaned over. Remember, let the evidence speak for itself. No matter what she claims, the financial records tell the true story. I nodded, maintaining the composure I'd carefully cultivated over the past months. The process of untangling our lives had been exhausting, but each step had brought me closer to freedom. All rise, the bailiff announced as the judge entered. As the proceedings began, I scanned the courtroom, surprised to see several familiar faces. Lisa sat in the back row, giving me an encouraging nod. Next to her was my brother, who had flown in from Seattle despite my insistence that it wasn't necessary. Even more unexpected was the presence of Keller and Westfield, our top clients who had apparently come to show their support. But the most shocking appearance came when the court doors opened quietly and Rebecca Craig slipped in. She met my eyes briefly, her expression resolute. Sarah hadn't noticed her yet. Your Honor, Sarah's lawyer began, my client contends that the financial irregularities in question were authorized business expenses, fully disclosed to her husband. This is simply a case of a marriage breaking down and Mr. Harrington seeking revenge through financial means. Sarah's expression was perfectly calibrated, wounded but dignified. I'd seen this performance before at dinner parties when she'd tell carefully edited stories of her difficult childhood, or in client meetings when she needed to appear vulnerable yet resilient. Furthermore, her lawyer continued, Mrs. Harrington has been subjected to emotional manipulation throughout their marriage, culminating in Mr. Harrington's vindictive attempts to destroy her professional reputation. I felt a flare of anger but kept my face neutral. The projection was almost impressive, accusing me of exactly what she had done. Alan stood when it was our turn. Your Honor, we have documentation proving systematic financial theft, not just from their joint accounts but from the company they co-owned. Additionally, we have evidence of Mrs. Harrington's intent to dissolve the business under false pretenses. As he presented our case, I watched Sarah's confidence begin to waver. She hadn't expected us to have such comprehensive evidence. When Alan called Rebecca Craig as a witness, Sarah's composure cracked completely. Rebecca approached the stand, poised and professional in her medical scrubs. She'd come directly from the hospital. She testified about the messages between Sarah and Daniel, about their plans, about the manipulation they'd both employed. Mr. Harrington sent me evidence that saved my family, Rebecca stated clearly. While discovering my husband's infidelity was painful, learning about their joint financial schemes prevented much worse damage. During a brief recess, I stepped into the hallway for air. Kate was waiting, a welcome sight in the sterile corridor. I'd met her at a support group for survivors of relational trauma 8 weeks ago. As a psychologist who'd been through a similar experience, she'd quickly become both a guide and a friend. How are you holding up? She asked, her dark eyes searching mine. Better than expected, I admitted. I thought seeing her would be harder. That's progress. Kate smiled, tucking her curly hair behind her ear. Recognition without emotional entanglement. You're healing. When we returned to the courtroom, an unexpected witness had been called, Sarah's former friend, Melissa, whom I'd only met twice before Sarah had declared her unreliable. Sarah asked me to help coordinate her meetings with Daniel, Melissa testified, avoiding Sarah's glare. I covered for her multiple times, creating fake girls' trips and work events. I'm ashamed of my role in this deception. Melissa described how Sarah had bragged about her plans, how she'd laughed about my ignorance, how she'd calculated exactly how much she could take without raising suspicions. By the time the day ended, Sarah's carefully constructed narrative had collapsed entirely. The judge's expression had shifted from neutral to increasingly troubled as the evidence mounted. Outside the courthouse, Sarah approached me as I waited for a taxi, her lawyer trailing behind her. You've made your point, she said quietly. You've won. Can we end this now, agree to reasonable terms? The time for negotiation was before you stole from our company and planned to destroy our business, I replied, surprised by my own calmness. The court will decide what's reasonable now. I never wanted it to come to this, she said, a hint of the old manipulation creeping into her voice. Yes, you did. You just wanted it on your terms. As my taxi arrived, Kate appeared beside me. Ready to go? Sarah's eyes flicked between us, something like genuine emotion finally breaking through her mask. Is this her? You're new. My friend, I said simply, opening the cab door for Kate. One of many I'm reconnecting with now that I can see clearly. For the first time since I'd known her, Sarah seemed at a loss for words. As the taxi pulled away, I felt another piece of her influence break free from my life. You did well today, Kate said, her hand briefly touching mine in support. I watched the courthouse recede in the rear window. I'm just getting started. I chose a cafe in the heart of downtown for our final meeting. Neutral territory with enough ambient noise for privacy but public enough to discourage drama. As I arrived early and secured a corner table, I realized I felt none of the anxiety that had plagued me during previous encounters with Sarah. She arrived 15 minutes late, a power move that no longer affected me. I noticed immediately how different she looked. Thinner, with dark circles under her eyes barely concealed by makeup, her usual confident stride diminished. The woman who sat across from me was a shadow of the Sarah I had known. Thank you for agreeing to meet, she said, her voice lacking its usual polished edge. I nodded, waiting. Sarah fidgeted with her coffee cup. My therapist suggested this. Closure, I suppose. For both of us. Is this the real therapist or another performance? The words came out sharper than intended. She winced but didn't protest. I deserve that. But yes, it's real this time. 3 sessions a week for the past 2 months. Silence stretched between us as the cafe bustled around us. People living normal lives untouched by betrayal and deceit. I've been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, she finally said, meeting my eyes directly. With manipulative tendencies stemming from childhood trauma. Your father mentioned the trauma, I acknowledged. She nodded. He would know. He was part of it. She took a sip of her coffee. Not that it excuses anything I did. The diagnosis explains but doesn't justify. Why are we here, Sarah? I asked, feeling suddenly tired. The divorce will be final next week. All the terms are settled. She reached into her bag and pulled out a USB drive, placing it on the table between us. All the financial documents, account passwords, everything I took or hid. Most of it you've already recovered, but there might be something you missed. I stared at the small device, surprised by this unsolicited offering. I also wanted you to know that I'm moving to Seattle next month. Fresh start. She gave a hollow laugh. New name, new city. It's a pattern, I guess. Going back to Claire? She shook her head. No. Using my mother's maiden name, Parker. Sarah Parker. Still keeping Sarah. It's the only name you knew me by, she said quietly. And despite everything, those years with you were the closest I've come to being genuine. I studied her face, searching for signs of manipulation but finding only exhaustion and something that looked remarkably like remorse. That relationship with Daniel, she continued, it wasn't what you think. Or what he thought, for that matter. You were using him for his connections, I recalled her claim from the hotel. Yes. But I was also trying to feel something, anything, real. The problem was... She hesitated. I don't know how to love properly. Never learned. By the time I realized what I was doing to you, to us, the pattern was too established to break. The raw honesty caught me off guard. This wasn't the calculated Sarah I knew, the one always 3 steps ahead, always performing. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she clarified. You've rebuilt your life admirably. The company's thriving. You have new connections. She didn't quite manage to keep the hint of jealousy from her voice. Kate, I supplied. Her name is Kate. Sarah nodded. She seems like someone who can give you what I couldn't. Authenticity. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 6 years hanging between us. I do have one question, I said finally. Was any of it real? Us. She considered this carefully. Parts were. More than I've ever managed with anyone else. I did love you, Tom, as much as I'm capable of love. That's the tragedy of it. You got the best version of me and it still wasn't enough. As we prepared to leave, she added, I hope someday you can remember something good about our time together. But I'll understand if you can't. We parted without embracing, without promises to stay in touch. Both of us knowing it was truly the end. 6 months later, I sat on a bench by the river, in the same spot where I'd come after discovering Sarah's betrayal. Back then, the water had seemed as turbulent as my emotions. Now, it flowed with a steady certainty that matched my own rebuilt confidence. Kate joined me, passing me a coffee as she sat. Penny, for your thoughts? Just reflecting on how different things look with perspective, I said, taking her hand in mine. Regrets? She asked. No, I answered truthfully. Just gratitude for the lesson. In the distance, the city skyline glittered with possibility. My phone buzzed with a message from my brother about our upcoming fishing trip. Another from Lisa confirming dinner plans with her and her husband next weekend. A notification from the business showing another quarter of growth. Ready to go? Kate asked. I took one last look at the river, at how it continued forward despite every obstacle, finding new paths when old ones were blocked. Yes, I said, standing. More than ready.